Welcome back, guys. Thank you all for waiting, and I see that not only you're all staying, but we have some more people coming in as well, so really glad to see that. So next up is the main demo I have prepared for today. So together with you, we will build a version of the product catalog report from scratch. It will not be an exact copy of the report, but we will try to do it pretty close to the original. And to those of you who are not familiar with it, I will show it to you. So it is a report which has a document map on the left. Remember, we talked about it, which basically displays a catalog of products using a table of contents and different report items. It displays a catalog of different products sold by a company, and it allows you to sort and expand, collapse, and navigate through the items, display text format, and so on. It also allows you to change the catalog to a different localized version, and it will also change the text to French and the currency to euros and stuff like that. So quite a lot of functionality is packed into this report, and this is why I have decided to choose this one to build together with you guys. So without further ado, let's jump into Visual Studio. Let's clean all of this. And first things first, let's start with the data source. So remember, there was a parameter. So we need to bind this parameter to a list of cultures that are supported by the AdventureWorks database. So before we are able to continue, let's add a second data source. Again, connect to AdventureWorks. And I have prepared a select statement which retrieves all the available cultures, which are Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Hebrew, and Thai. Let's give it a nice name. All right. So now, next thing we can do with our report is create our report parameter that because as you see, we need the report parameter to filter and the data that we receive from the database server and switch between the rendering and formatting behavior. So how do we do this? We right click and go to report parameters and we click add. So first let's name it. to something more reasonable. For example, culture ID, and we'll give it a text language. Right now, we'll give it a initial value for English, and using the visible property, we'll set it to true in order to expose this to the end user, so they will see a nice drop down when opening the report. Also, we want to set the auto refresh property to true, and this will trigger the report engine to recreate everything and update the UI with the refresh data. Remember, we also talked about the available values property, and here we can actually supply our report parameter with a data source. So we choose the cultures data source, which will provide all the available cultures in our database. And let's just choose a display member. Let's just show the name of the culture. And the value for the parameter would be the culture ID. Okay. So now we have already created our parameter. It is not connected to anything, but it is it is already data bound to all the cultures available in the database, but we haven't done the other direction of the binding, and we can do this by editing the original data source. Here you will see that initially I hard-coded the English culture in the select statement. Now we can actually supply a parameter and this parameter would be our report parameter. So here we are actually specifying that our report parameter will supply the value for this culture ID parameter that I just added to the select statement. This is how we are making the upstream binding of the report parameter. And for design time, we'll just supply the English value as a default design time value to be used for design time. We'll execute the query, make sure everything still works. It looks like it, and click finish. And now, if we let's just test this real quick. Drag a description, for example, in our report, and now we see that we have some text in English. And if we switch to French, we see now the report parameter has caused our data source component to retrieve the appropriate data from the database. If you go for Thai or Hebrew and so on, it works correctly as expected. Let's remove this. Let's clean this as well. So let's see what kind of pages we have. So the first section is the page header section, and we want to do some page information in that. So how do we do it? We drag a text box. And we give it some text. Actually, we need page number here. And just like this, we have some paging information available by using an embedded expression. So all we have to do is set the contents of the text box to some of these objects. Remember, we talked about the Go objects, so page count and page number, they are available in the page header and the page footers. So next, let's define some groups, because we have a lot of data. We have product category, we have product subcategory, we have product model, and so on and so on. So there's a lot of data. We might want to aggregate this data. Let's do it. In order to do it, we need to create some groupings. We right click, select the groups, and we want our first group. Let's just say group 1. And we go to the groupings field. And we indicate that we'll be grouping this by product category. And for the sortings, let's just sort it also by the product category in, let's say, ascending order. So next, we see some properties here. Remember, we talked about the table of contents and the document map. So here we can actually bind the content of the group key to the appropriate table of content. So we just select product category, and again product category for the table of content text. I told you these usually go hand in hand. And let's just indicate that we want the keep together for the group, because we don't want it to break along other pages. So let's create our second group. This time we will group it by the subcategory. And also sort by this. And also use it again for the document map text and for the table of contents text. And let's give it a name. Let's say some group together to keep it together with the first detail. And let's create our final group by group model, by product model. So we already know the drill. However, this time we only want to include the third level of grouping in the document map, because if we include it in the table of contents, it will be way too much detail. And I think that's it. Looks good. So now please notice that 3 new group headers appeared in the report. Remember when we discussed groupings, I told you that for each group we create, Telerik Reporting creates a header and footer section to go with the group. This will be very useful because they will have their data context set to a particular instance of the group. Okay, so let's see what we can do next. All right. We don't have a table of contents. Let's do one right now. Simply click table of contents and it will add it. However, we see that it only includes the major product categories. We can improve this a little bit. Going to the levels, property. Now let's create level 1 and clear the leader symbol. Okay. And let's also add a second level. And also for the first one, we want to make it a bit bigger. And maybe make it italic. And for the second one, to be a bit smaller. And we also have a leading symbol of dot. And here we get a preview of how things will look like. So now we hit the preview and we see. By the way, you notice how we don't have a lot of data. This is because we still have these things, these guys over here. So let's remove them. And let's try again. All right. So now we have quite a bit more on our hands. We have the major categories, we have the subcategories as well, and on the left we have a document map which has all 3 levels of nesting. It has the main category and the subcategory in the product model. So let's add a label and call this product catalog and make it big. We can also add a shape, a horizontal line. We can anchor this to the ends. And below that, something that's very common to do when we have groupings is to add the key for the group. So in this case, it will be the product category. And we can also set one global style sheet. To make all text boxes use the Segoe UI font. All right. Let's see how we're doing. It's still mostly empty, but we are getting somewhere. So the next group section is the one for the subcategory. So let's display this one as well. So now we see that we also have the subcategories. Okay. And let's shrink this. So because we don't plan to use the details section and the footers, we can go ahead in the property grid and hide them by setting their visible properties to false. Should save us some space. Okay, and now even though we have not collapsed them completely, they will not be taking any space anymore because we have hidden them. So now let's show the meat of the report. We'll do it in a panel inside the last group section. So we want to show the picture. And let's do it scale proportional sizing. And the product model. and the description. And for the description, because it will vary, we want to also set both the can grow and can shrink properties, because we want to reclaim all this space in case we don't want the description takes less, is shorter, and we want to reclaim this space during the rendering phase. So we set it can shrink to true. So let's see how we're doing so far. So we have our table of contents, and now we already have a product catalog. We have a page 2 or 4. We have the subcategory, then we have the product model and a picture, as well as the description. And if we switch to French, of course, we have that text in French. So let's add our table. So in our table, we want to have some data. Let's start with the product number, then add the product name, and then we can do color and size. Well, we need to insert some more columns. So let's do standard costs. And list price. Okay. We can actually edit this header text. It is auto-populated, but we can shorten it. It is static text, so we can do whatever we want. So we just product. Color is fine. Size is fine. Actually make it smaller. Weight 2. So this will be viewer pricing. And list price. All right. Let's bring this back together. All right. So let's see what we have so far. Well, it's taking quite a lot of time, and I have a sneaking suspicion we messed something up. Yep. So you see, we have the section for road bikes, but then we have long sleeve jerseys. So what happened wrong? So remember that the data table is a special kind of guy. It's a data item, and it has its own data source. So let's take a look. It has assumed that the data source is the same as the product data source. However, we want the data source of the table to be context sensitive to what is available inside this group section. So how do we set this? Well, first of all, we clear this, and then we go to the bindings, and we create a new binding for the data source property and set it to a new expression. And remember, we talked about the report item data object. So report item data object is the current data context available in the group section. We are currently placing this data table. So now if we run this again, you see it takes a lot less time, and now we can see that we have actually correctly displaying data in the table. However, it is a bit ugly still, so let's go back to the designer and try to improve things a little bit. We need less space for the number. So prices, we can go to format and set currency. So now we see everything is in dollars, even though we changed the French. So how do we change the formatting culture for the price text box? Well, the report has a culture property, but since that property doesn't support expressions, we can do something clever and add a binding, because we talked that some of the properties do support expressions out of the box, some of them don't. And for those that don't, we need to do it through a binding. So we select the culture property, and where do we get the culture? We actually can get it from our parameter. And now, if we change to French, hopefully, yes, great, it works. We should see prices now being displayed in euros. So we can go ahead and style this a bit, make it bold. And let's say we want to add sorting by the price. How do we do this? We go to the column, header, and go to interactivity action, go sorting. We need to select a sort target, which will be the table, and give it a sort expression. So we're sorting by the standard price, Now let's find this. I'll just sort by standard cost. And for list price, we can do the same thing. We should be sorting the table. Right. And now you see that we can click on the sorting symbol and we have things sorted. And there you have it. We have come up with a sort of similar to the original product catalog report. We've taken a look at different functionalities, report parameters, bindings, groups, tables, document map, table of content, filtering, sorting, and so on and so on. This is how to build one report from scratch. So let's go back to the slide deck. I had planned a short break, but I think we can skip this one. So moving on, how do we display these reports in our applications? Because it's so fine and dandy looking at the preview in the Visual Studio Designer or in the Telerik Report Designer, but what if you want to actually utilize Telerik Reporting in an application? So luckily, Progress provides us with report viewers for almost all of the platforms they provide components for. So using the report viewer, you will be able to render reports in your application. Depending on the platform you're using, you can use either the embedded report engine, which means that the report viewer itself will host the report engine, or you can use a remotely placed report engine, and this is achieved using the reporting REST service, or you can do this with the report server. So you can also render reports in applications using the API. Programmatically, you can instantiate a report engine in your C# code, let's say, and you can use that as well, although it's more advanced. If you don't want to use a report viewer at all, you can do this. All the classes are public and available, and you can even create reports programmatically via the .NET APIs. You don't even need to use the standalone report designer or the Visual Studio Designer. You can actually code your report definition using API calls. It's not ideal. It's I don't know a good reason. Most of the people wouldn't want to use this as an option, but let's say you want to build them dynamically. You can totally do this if that's your cup of tea. And last but not least, the reporting engine could be configured using the standard config files for applications. So that's the web.config for web applications and app.config for desktop apps. So you can specify settings for the report vendor such as DPI and so on and so on via these config files. This is all in the documentation. We don't have the time to look at all this today. So the major way to display reports in applications is using the report viewers. So they are available, as I said, for a variety of platforms, for HTML5 with MVC and WebForms support. There's an Angular report viewer. There's WinForms, WPF, Silverlight even. And each of those supports a variety of report sources. So let's take a look at those. The one report source is the URI report source. So it's basically give it a URI path either to a file on the local file system or to a URL which contains the TRDP file. You can also use a typed report source. So this one works with report libraries, so with assemblies. These are the report definitions which are generated by the Visual Studio Designer. You can also use a instance report source, which is you create a instance of the report source manually using the APIs, or you can even have an XML report source, for example, in cases when you want to instantiate a report just from XML string. For example, if you retrieved the report definition from a database server. So I have prepared one more demo on how to do this in an application. So let's fire up another instance of Visual Studio. Let's say we want to host a report in WinForms. So let's just create a WinForms application. Then we can go to the toolbox, locate Telerik Reporting, and here we have the report viewer. We simply drag it onto the form, and then all we have to do is set the report source. You don't even need to write code. There's a nice designer. So we just discussed the different types of report sources. Let's use the URI file source, and let's just select the product catalog, our favorite report. You can even supply parameters here, but we're not going to do this right now. And now you would be tempted to hit F5 and see what will happen. And we can do this. See, nothing happens. Because for WinForms, we need to actually tell the report viewer when the form is loaded to refresh its content. Okay, so now we get an error that we are unable to establish connection to the database. Remember, in the beginning, when we created, when we added our data source, it gave us the option to either embed this into the report definition, or as I told you, if it's a shared connection string by name, the application will look for this in the standard application configuration file. So let's do this. Let's open the app config, and all it needs is a connection string here. I have this one handy. Let's run it again. And now we see that the report viewer is connected successfully, and everything works beautifully. I can change the parameter, and everything is just fine. And now we have a Windows Forms application showing a Telerik Reporting app. So let's try another one. Let's create a web one. Let's do a standard ASP.NET web application. And this time we'll be using the REST service. However, because of a recent update in Visual Studio, the template for this doesn't work out of the box. So in order to fix this, the guys at Telerik know about this program, and they will release updated templates. But if you're using the latest of everything, it will currently not work. So what you need to do is add some NuGet packages. So the first one is you need to add them manually. So the WebAPI web hosts package. And we also need to change the versions of some of the dependencies. I assure you the guys are working around the clock. The Visual Studio update from Microsoft caught them off guard. It broke the template, so they were kind enough to provide us with this workaround. So we'll be able to show you the demo today. But it will be a fix for this should be released pretty soon. And the last format we need is document format, OpenXML. All right, let's save and rebuild everything. Everything built. So let's now go and click Add, New Item, and we'll add the HTML5 report viewer. Let's call it index.html. And now we don't have the option anymore for embedded engine. So we use the REST service option. And let's just go with the sample report definition. You see, everything completes successfully. We also need to go to the web config and add our connection string. And let's see if this works. So here we have a sample report. We can replace it with the product catalog, no problem. So it has created this reports folder, so you can simply put your reports in it and just go to the index.html file and find the report source. And here, just type the new name of the report you want to show, and it will load up just fine. The last report viewer I want to show is the Angular one, because it's very cool and different. So if you're following modern web development technologies, the folks at Progress are also on top of things. So they have a sample prepared for the Angular CLI. You can just do this using standard npm install command and wait a bit. It shouldn't take this long right now because I've already cached everything, because I ran this earlier during the day while preparing the demos. Let me show you the code. So there is a Progress Telerik Angular report viewer that is imported. And it is being instantiated in the template using the TR viewer. And here again, you set the service URI, some other properties. Using the Angular syntax, you can modify all the standard APIs for the report viewer that you can do in WinForms or in MVC. Okay. So maybe my Angular CLI is missing. I didn't install it. Anyway, what will happen when you type this ngserf, it will again start a development web server, and it will load up the same HTML5 report viewer. Just this time it is wrapped in an Angular component. We've already seen it. There's nothing different. It's the same from the MVC demo I just made. So all I need to do to run this is install the Angular CLI, because apparently it's not on this machine, but I don't want to waste any time for you waiting for npm install command. So it's nothing really interesting. We've already seen it. So this is the real meat of the thing. So let's go ahead. There's also a WPF viewer as well. It is very similar to the wizards, to the WinForms, and to the MVC. Again, it is utilizing a template, and you can choose to use the REST service or the embedded engine, anything you feel like using. So again, the only difference is it's running in WPF as opposed to WinForms or Angular or MVC. So I promised some of you that I will also show you today how to import some reports from the designer. So let's go to Visual Studio. So we go to reporting, Telerik Report import wizard. Let's just call it imported. And we can go and select a file. Of course, product catalog, what else? Our favorite report. And suddenly you see that the whole thing is imported. And we can click preview. Of course, we need to add our connection string. And it works just as well. And also we can go the other way around. You can go open. We can open the assembly. And we can again re-import the one we just imported or the one we worked on today. Let's import this one. And you see, this is what we worked on in Visual Studio, imported in the Telerik Report Designer. So pretty easy, out of the box, works well. I haven't run into any problems so far. This is how you do it. So report server, it's a rather new member of the family. You know, a lot of reporting software on the market offers a report server functionality. So the main idea is to allow you to share easily reports created in Telerik Reporting. You host them, upload them to a report server hosted somewhere in your organization, and you just copy and paste a link to a report, send it to your buddy, and they can load it up. Another advantage of using a report server as opposed to you're writing your own web application with Report Viewer is that it adds a lot of value over the standard web report viewer. So it allows you to set user level access permissions. So for example, you can protect some of the reports, make them accessible maybe only to management or to certain parts of your organization. And there's also organizational features such as categories and so on. Another cool thing that you can do with the Telerik report server is it also has built-in versioning of the report. So whenever you upload something, you can also open it with the standalone report viewer from the server directly, make some changes to it, and re-upload the new version. So the report server will keep track of all the revisions that you have created. And if you messed something up by mistake, you can easily go to the report server and revert back to a previous version of the report. Another nice functionality that the report server has is that it allows you to have a scheduler, a scheduled execution of and distribution of reports. So for example, if you have set up a dashboard sort of report in the report server, and the data behind this report in the database server is updated daily with new data, with fresh data, You can configure your report server to email you a PDF, for example, snapshot of the newly generated report every day in your inbox. Oh, that's quite convenient. You can customize the template for those emails. There's even alerts management. So if you can even configure the report server to keep track of a certain very important for your business KPI. And if it goes out of a predefined range of values, the report server will email you an alert. So saying, okay, sales for today, for yesterday, were less than the predefined boundaries. Maybe something is happening, check it out. So quite useful things. Another important feature of the report server is alerts management. Shared data connections. So you can define connection strings on the server level, and this will allow you some flexibility. For example, you can easily switch the data source for the reports displayed without modifying the reports at all. And in this way, you will be able, for example, to switch from, like, say, test data to production data and do all kinds of interesting scenarios. Last but not least, the report server is configurable and accessible through a RESTful API. I have included a link here for you. You check out the documentation. You can use the REST API to interact with the server and do all the things that the client applications do. They're using the same API, so you can code your own app to work against this server. Pretty cool. So a short demo. So let me show you something. The report server is installed just as another website on your IIS, on your local machine. In this case, on port 83. So to open it, just click it. And here we are. So you can, for example, open the dashboard and it will load up. You can change the year. Notice how the URL changes. That's really useful. So if you want to share a link to your report with the report parameter configured just exactly as you like it, you can. And if you paste this to a colleague or email it and they will open this link, they will see exactly the same thing you are seeing right now. So that's pretty cool. Again, you can have a history. Many can track revisions. You can organize stuff by categories. Here you can configure connection strings for different reports. You can switch them. Here is the scheduler where you can create a task which will select a report and render it and email it to you. You can set the recurrence, you can configure parameters for the report, even customize your email template. There's lots of goodies in here. Again, data alerts, something we talked about. And last but not least, user management. Cool thing about user management, it's not only locally stored, you can actually supports federation with Active Directory. So you can easily plug in your corporate Active Directory into this and integrate this with your domain controller. So cool things indeed. The license to the report server is just 1,500 bucks, and it comes with 15 client access licenses and free updates for a year, and you can purchase 5 more for $500. So this is about it for today's training. Hopefully I was able to get you started on your way to using the Telerik Reporting and the reporting server. Again, as I said in the beginning, it's not possible to encompass every nook and cranny of this really big product. Hopefully I was able to touch on the most important features and functionalities. And to take things further, to continue learning by yourself, feel free to visit some of the resources I am providing. The most important one is the documentation, which I have used extensively when learning this product. Also, there's the documentation for the report server too, and something that helped me a lot when learning is also looking at some predefined demos. You can see some cool feature and then you open the definition and try to actually see how it is implemented. So that's a really good way to learn too. And also you can always subscribe if you're interested in Telerik Reporting. You can always subscribe to the Telerik blogs, and they blog about reporting quite often. And there's some interesting topics and custom cases that are usually not covered in the documentation, and it's an excellent resource for learning more about Telerik Reporting. So this concludes today's training and virtual classroom training about Telerik Reporting. I'm very happy to have had the opportunity to share my experience and passion about the Progress products with you. Feel free to submit any remaining questions and some feedback. As I said in the beginning, these training sessions are refreshed for each major release. We want to do our best job at delivering the most useful training to you, the Progress customers. So if you have some feedback, if you liked it, if you think I missed something, or if you'd like to improve, change things a bit, I will be more than happy to read your feedback and try and incorporate this into version 2 of this training. So with that said, thank you very much for participating in this training. I will hold a bit and wait for some of your questions, and I will answer them after I stop talking. Thank you once again, and see you in some other next virtual classroom training.